I heard about the news that you posted in the group, Sheikh, about Naeem's grandmother.
Very, very sad.
I actually sent him a voice note right before you sent the voice, your message, and I was just thinking how difficult it must have been for the family.
Yeah, very, very difficult. I've been in touch and in contact with him, kind of talking through, just what are some of the options and whatnot. So,
It must be so devastating for the family, just the fact that they lost someone so close to them and they can't even go to see them. I can't
mhm.
imagine that. I
Yeah,
mean, we read these stories about people from across the world, but then now seeing this happen in America, in particular, Muslim families. Like I was speaking today to the Mishkat class, and I was telling them that at this point, every day I'm getting a message from someone in the Muslim community who's saying that they have a family member that's hospitalized due to COVID-19. And
yeah.
today we received our very first sad news that someone actually from our very close friend, someone who's like family to us, has passed away.
Yeah, very, very difficult.
La ilaha illallah. I mean, death is difficult as it is, Sheikh, but then
Yes.
imagine a person passing away alone
So,
without even having anyone there, no one by your side. You're just lying there alone. Allah knows of all the pain you're going through and how difficult it must be for those people to even breathe in that moment. And then everyone's deserting you. It must feel like Qiyamah before even Qiyamah,
Allahu Akbar.
right? I mean, you know what I mean?
I do, I do. I
Oh,
do.
Allah.
And then also for the family that survives the deceased and the loved one, for them to also just the pain and how difficult it must be to not be able to see and tend to somebody so beloved to them who has passed away.
You know, one thing I learned, Sheikh, when my mother, rahimahullah, passed away,
Rahimahullah.
was how important janaza and ghusl actually was.
Huge.
I always thought of it as being just a fiqh thing, where there
Mhm.
were fiqh implications to it, there were a lot of fiqh guidelines. But I learned the day I was there for my mother's ghusl and also for her takfeen and her janaza, that this was all about closure, actually.
Mhm.
It offered so much closure being there in those final moments of, just doing that ghusl and doing the kafan and then being there for the janaza. And for people who can't do that, Allahu Akbar. I
Yeah,
mean,
and it kind of seems like it's this way to like honor a loved one, in their moment of departing to the next life, and not being able to do that, must be profoundly painful and difficult.
we're going to be getting these stories more and more. I hope that, I mean, not to be that guy, but it is what it is,
Hmm.
May Allah make it easy.
I mean, I mean, subhanallah.
So we are live, right, Sheikh?
We are alive.
We are
Absolutely.
live. Okay, we're good. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah.
Sheikh, you want to start us off?
Yeah, Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. So those who have attended or watched or listened to, whatever you want to call it, one of the Hangouts previously, you guys know how this works and what exactly we're doing here. But for those who might be logging on for the very first time, we want to welcome you to the Qalam Hangout. The Qalam Hangout is our opportunity to just have a conversation with one another, number of different issues that we talk about from time to time, things that are relevant in the community, things that have been on our minds, things that we've been reading about and we've been thinking about. And as I've mentioned previously, a lot of times we end up having these very extended, in-depth conversations, and after a lot of feedback from a lot of folks and a lot of input and suggestions, we decided to start making some of these conversations available for the community as well, as a resource, hopefully, that there might be some insight. Somebody else might be able to relate to some of these discussions and conversations, and also the vibe, if you want to call it that, The mood, the vibe is a little bit more casual, a little bit more laid back. And so we thought it'd be kind of nice to bring folks into, the hangout. So that's what we're doing here, alhamdulillah. And so, the two of us are here right now, Mufti Hussein Kamani, of course, and myself. And inshallah, Ustad Abdurrahman will be joining us soon, inshallah. As soon as he's done with his biryani, he'll be joining us soon as well, inshallah. So today's topic, so what we did was Mufti Kamani, mashallah, suggested that if we're able to, figure out exactly maybe what we're going to talk about beforehand, not only does it give us a chance to kind of think about maybe what we're going to be discussing, but it allows us to also let the community know that from beforehand what we're going to be talking about. So if they have any questions, they can send in their questions and they can kind of come with a bit mentally prepared for the discussion, inshallah. So today, inshallah, what we're going to be talking about is individualism versus community. Just the idea, because the idea of community, and we're going to talk more about it, kind of defining it and talking about exactly what it means in general, what it means to us maybe. But then this idea of being an individual and, kind of one's own self-autonomy, and how those two forces basically interact with one another. What is the tension there between a sense of individualism versus the spirit of community? And then particularly, just kind of how that plays out in real life. And right now, we'll probably talk about it as well. Right now is a moment where it particularly becomes highlighted, the tension between individualism and community. Mufti Sahib, you had shared some thoughts that I thought were very interesting, where you were kind of talking about, kind of defining these two particular ideas. So if you could share some of those thoughts.
Yeah, so when we talk about individualism and community, I think most Muslims right off the bat assume that individualism is a bad thing. And there are some people that when they think of community, they think that we're actually promoting collectivism, some sort of a hyper social political model, And I wanted to basically set a balance of what we are talking about today. What we are referring to when we discuss the issue of individualism isn't necessarily, we aren't talking about the political element of it, which is all about, having your freedom and how the society takes the individual into consideration versus collectivism, where the individual doesn't matter at all, what you earn, what you do. It's not really, it's just a social welfare system. So we're not talking about it from a political perspective. I think right now, when we talk about individualism, our concern is what role does focusing and prioritizing yourself have versus developing and building a community. And I'm almost sure that as we go into this conversation, there will be so many nuances and so many good discussions that are going to come out tonight. But I think one thing to know right off the bat is balance. In everything in life, there's a balance. If there is proper attention given to the individual and proper attention given to the community, you will have a perfect model. And this is what Islam promotes. This is what Islam teaches. Islam isn't a community which in its political theory focuses on collectivism and absolute collectivism, and neither is it a religion that promotes only individualism. We have like a middle ground where we're kind of educating and training people on focus on the individual. I think of a very famous and beautiful passage that I recall studying of Shah Waliullah Muhaddith Dehlawi rahmatullahi alayhi. Famous scholar, thinker, intelligent man. And he was talking about curriculum and how in order for a curriculum to be successful, it needs to focus on 4 different areas. And the first he talks about is it must focus on the individual. It needs to, in order for this curriculum to be successful, if you're teaching at an Islamic school, a public school, you're teaching some sort of Islamic curriculum to your Sunday school, at a seminary. You need to make sure that your curriculum addresses individual needs. So what is fard ayn to me? Then the second he talks about is, how does that now apply, that knowledge that you gain, how does it apply to your immediate circle, your family? And then broadening that circle a little more, your locality, and then broadening it further. And that's like that alami sort of universal vision.
Right.
So there is without doubt an emphasis in Islam on individualism. Now I'm going to pass it over to Sheikh Abdul Nasser, but as I pass it over to Sheikh and he addresses his thoughts on, what Islam has to say about individualism, because people ask this question, is Islam compatible with individualism? And as I mentioned at the beginning, there is this political sense to it all where it's about liberties and freedoms. And there's a question that, is Islam compatible with it or not? So that's that one discussion there. And then the second side to it is that, is there a such thing as focusing too much on yourself?
Yeah.
Where that becomes bad? Or is it always good to just give yourself priority and, and that's that?
Yeah. And I feel that there's this sense within a lot of people in our community. So, like I said before, I don't want the conversation to only be about this, but I'm just using it as an example in the situation that we're in right now. And there's a lot of emphasis on community and think about the collective and think about everyone together and how we can help one another and how we can all thrive and survive and whatnot. So there's obviously a lot of emphasis on thinking as an ummah and thinking as, a collective and thinking as a community. So there's that kind of emphasis is there right now. But when thinking about this particular issue and the tension between individualism and community, one of the things that I observe is that I think that a lot of people, and like we said, from even the Muslim point of view, that a lot of Muslims also are very, like you said, a little bit anxious when this particular topic comes and we talk about the tension between individualism and community, because they're translating or they're interpreting, they're understanding as, individualism being more about me, self-respect, like my own self kind of respect, my own personal significance, my own personal honor, my own personal dignity. And then they also think about that the idea of thinking as a collective, maybe that it implies that my own opinion, even in the affairs and the matters of my own life, does not matter.
Does Islam dictate to you how you dress? Does Islam, does your opinion on, Sheikh, what you eat matter? Does Islam respect that individual decision of yours of who you marry and where you live and how you dress?
What I want to study, what I want to do for a living, what, like you said, who I want to marry, what kind of a house I want to buy, or what kind of residence I want to live in, what kind of an apartment do I want to reside in, what kind of car I want to drive. Because I do think that, and while even the word tribe is not a bad word, and it's been a very, very beneficial structure for the majority of human beings throughout the majority of human history, but in a lot of places, the way that the tribe operates and the way that tribalism has been implemented, and there's smaller kind of microcosms of that, even in our community, the khandan, the extended family, right? That I think a lot of people feel a lot of nervousness around this issue because their experience has been that the moment you talk about thinking about family over yourself as an individual, or thinking about the community versus yourself, that means I have to completely give up my own autonomy. I have to give up, somebody posted a comment, I have to give up my own privacy. I have to give up my own kind of almost sense of dignity. I cannot have any kind of like or dislike. I cannot have any choice in the matter. I never am allowed to have my own personal opinion on anything. And I'm just completely just a cog in this system. Right. And so what I try to explain to people a lot of times, like you were talking about the sense of balance, is Islam is emphasizing being an ummah and being a community and emphasizing family and extended family and all these different things. But it's not doing so at the expense of our just existence and our dignity as individuals and as human beings. And Islam is not demanding from us, and I use an analogy that Islam doesn't want us to be the Borg. So the Borg, for those that might not be familiar, I'm not a Star Trek head personally. I'm more of a Star Wars guy. But yeah, what are you gonna do? I was actually a kid when the original Star Wars came out, so I'm a Star Wars kid. But in Star Trek, one thing I kind of came across a little bit was there was this one particular entity called the Borg, and they're literally like connected. Their brains are connected, and there is no individual. And they have no significance. The individual has zero significance, and you're just a part of this bigger machine, right? You're like a nut or a bolt or a screw in this big thing. That's not what Islam wants that's not what Islam is talking about. Islam isn't talking about just giving up exactly who you are or anything of that sort. But at the same time, I think it's also fair to say that what we witness in a lot of society today is we see what we can maybe then call hyper individualism. And then you also, kind of in our pre-discussion, you shared a comment even about hyper individualism that people find that we're kind of seeing in our culture today, and it's very, very problematic.
Sheikh, before we go to hyper individualism, there's one thought that came to my mind because you said something very beautiful right now. This whole Borg idea, where Islam isn't promoting that everyone becomes one.
Mm-hmm.
You know? So I had this thought the other day because, as you know, I'm raising my kids and they're young and they're growing by the day.
Yes.
And like every father in the world, I am one of those fathers too, unfortunately, that thinks that I have it all figured out.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that my way is the right way and this is what should be done. And you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And when my son says to me that, Dad, I don't want to do something the way you're saying to do it, it irks me a little, you know, kind of like, oh, really?
Like when he says that he doesn't want to shave his head.
Don't do it. Don't do it, Sheikh.
I did it before Assad got here. You're lucky I did it before he got here.
I only know one haircut. This is all I know. They had to get a haircut. The barber was me. I had a trimmer. All that hair came off.
You know what it is though? It shows that you have the soul and the spirit of a Haji.
I have the soul and spirit of a survivor, Sheikh. Coronavirus is not ending in 2 weeks, which means 2 months from now, my kids are going to look like they're out of the zoo or something.
So, mashallah, now they're all Hujjaj.
We call it Corona Hujjaj, Corona Mu'tabirin. So, you know, like I tell them that, hey, let's do this. And they're like, no, that's not a good idea. Or I don't want this. Or, you know, I don't prefer this. So for a moment, I think to myself, man, I should kind of just enforce it. And let's make them do what I want. Mm-hmm. Right? Because I'm the father and I can do that right now. They're still young. Yeah. You know? They're still under like 15, 16 before they can actually like say no. So then I stopped for a moment and I asked myself, did the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam have the best personality?
100%.
100%. Did he seize or did he suck out the personality of the people around him that became Muslim?
Not at all.
So is it fair to say that the companions had different personalities?
Absolutely. Yeah, I remember reading in one of the books of like Tazkiyah and Tarbiyah and stuff, it talked about how Izala versus Imala, the famous kind of idea from Tazkiyah and Tasawwuf. It talks about Izala. That is to just completely uproot and eradicate who someone is, versus Imala, which is to recognize what their strengths and weaknesses are, what their, you know, kind of inclinations are, and then direct their energies in a more productive direction.
Yeah, I mean, I think there were some companions who prior to Islam who had a particular personality, and then when they come into Islam, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam doesn't change who the individual is. He doesn't change that person. He
Mhm.
allows them to continue to grow as an individual in that realm, because starting them all over again and telling them that who they were was wrong fundamentally would be ending their purpose. They wouldn't
Yeah,
have any excitement.
I remember there's a particular conversation I had in regards to a senior imam. So, scholar, imam. And so, obviously, right, his passion and his life's work is ilm and ta'aleem and tadris and teaching the community and, really dedicated to ilm and tarbiyah. His son, his only son, was a very energetic, rambunctious, like kid,
Mhm.
swinging from the ceiling and climbing up and jumping off of everywhere. And for a while, it started kind of going in a destructive direction where he was getting in trouble. He was getting in a lot of fights. He was making a lot of trouble, this and that. And it seemed like the initial tension was that the imam was basically trying to direct the boy, his son, in the direction of like what he was about, right? Sit down and read, sit down and read, sit down and read. And this kid was just bursting at the seams. And later on, he realized that along with going to school and doing what needs to be done, instead of in the free time trying to turn him into this talibul ilm that he wanted to see him become, he directed the kid's energy, instead of letting him go wild and run amok, he directed eventually, and this is the wisdom on the part of that imam, he directed his son's energies more in the direction of like athletics and sports. And I mean, something you're very familiar with, mixed martial arts. And he directed him in that direction. And the young man was actually able to find an outlet to let out his energy. He was able to actually find a lot of discipline and a work ethic by applying himself there. And later on in life became a very, very, balanced, healthy, productive individual. But he didn't find his discipline sitting in front of books the way his father wanted him to or would have liked him to. But he found his discipline and work ethic by engaging in sports and athletics and mixed martial arts and all this kind of stuff. One of our very, very senior hadith and fiqh teachers, I was talking to him. He has one son, and he told me the same thing. I remember when I visited him, like, a few years back, a while back, and he was like, "Oh, make dua, my son, he's not very interested in studies and this and that. He's not into his studies. Like, you want him to study further ulum and things like that." But then later on realized that his son, was very passionate about like math and engineering and things like that. And eventually, I remember just a couple of years ago when I was visiting him, he said, I made my peace with that and I understood that and I let him kind of follow that passion. And he said he became such a model young man
Oh wow.
and became so, disciplined and so productive and so happy and so good to us, his parents. And because that was just kind of where he felt like he was inclined towards. So just kind of going back to what you were saying, that using like smaller examples, because the Prophet ﷺ is the ultimate example, but maybe that'll help kind of give a little bit of reality to what we're talking about. But you're absolutely right. The Sahaba had different personalities, they had different temperaments, they had different strengths and weaknesses. And the Prophet ﷺ, directed their energies where their energies were used best.
Mm.
Absolutely. Khalid bin Walid radiallahu ta'ala anhu is a soldier, and the Prophet called him Saifullah. And Abdullah bin Mas'ud radiallahu ta'ala anhu is a scholar, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he channeled his energies in that direction. Abdullah bin Abbas, he made Allahumma faqihu fi din wa alimhu ta'wil, or like give him the knowledge and understanding of the religion and allow him to understand and interpret the Quran. أعلمكم بالحلال والحرام معاذ بن جبل, most knowledgeable amongst you about halal and haram matters, fatwa issues, fiqh issues, is Mu'adh bin Jabal. So yeah, absolutely, that seems very, very evident.
Another thing that comes to my mind is that I believe it's important to understand that focusing on the individual and focusing on the self is actually primary in Islam.
Hmm.
It's something that we are very big on and something we believe in. It's that hyper individualism that we are not fans of. And I think that's what Sheikh Abdul Nasser referred to a few moments ago. But before we go to hyper individualism, I
Yeah.
wanted to just reflect for a moment and address this issue of the focus of focusing on the individual. Allah Azza wa Jalla says in the Quran, "Qu anfusakum wa ahlikum nara."
No, absolutely.
I mean, how often have we seen, Sheikh, that someone decides to get involved with dawah work, someone decides to get involved with community work, but they have no grounding themselves. They have no preparation. So there's no individual at the core of this community that they're trying to develop.
I mean, in our tradition, that's always been talked about as a very, very dangerous thing. And in today, obviously, like, because in our tradition, it's always been known as a dangerous thing. So further in today's world, when it manifests, it ends up being such a destructive and terrible thing.
Where it's just about, you know, people think that I can focus and deliver to the community before developing myself. I spoke to a group of young guys and girls the other day, and they're involved with working with the youth across America, a national organization. And one of the advices I gave them, I said, on behalf of the Ummah, I ask you to please stop serving people if you can't serve yourself first.
Mm,
Like, I'm asking you on behalf of everyone
yeah,
that don't do another youth halaqah if you're not willing to study yourself.
absolutely.
We need to know that the people that are building the community have something to offer, and that's where that individual comes in. You know,
Yeah.
and there are so many ahadith of the Prophet ﷺ on focusing on yourself first. You
Yeah,
know,
and I mean, you're subhanallah, you're talking about a hadith, which is the ultimate resource, right? Quran and Sunnah. I mean, even the Arabic proverb, right? Faqidu shay la yu'ti shay,
yeah.
right? Someone who doesn't have anything can't give you nothing. If I don't know the directions, which I never know directions, all right? If anybody ever comes to Dallas, Google Maps is your friend. Do not ask me how to get anywhere because I don't know how to get anywhere. Right? So if you ask me for directions, you're probably going to drive your car into a ditch somewhere. All right? It's not going to end well. You're going to end up in like Oklahoma or somewhere. Okay? So somebody who ain't got nothing can't give you nothing. It's a reality. It's a truth.
So focusing on that individual becomes so important then.
Moti Saab, can I tell you something?
Yeah.
I just saw that my dear friend Khalid logged on. So this is Mufti Saab, let me tell you something. This is a young man, mashallah, bright, smart, sharp as a tack. All right. We go
Did you say
to
it's sharp as tack?
sharp as a, no, not Tokir tack, like tack, T-A-C-K. And we go to my tafsir class, or we used to go to my tafsir class. Inshallah, we will again soon. But we would go to my tafsir class at South Lake. Every single week we go together. And he's driving. We've been doing this for at least like 6 months, Mufti Saab, and this guy still uses Google Maps to get there. And it's a 20-minute drive.
Well, Sheikh, he can't rely on you, is it?
That's the problem. He's got me in the passenger seat, so I'm infecting him. I'm having a bad effect on him. But buddy sohbat.
You know, there's a famous story, right? That one time someone came to Ali radiallahu anhu and said to him, yeah, in the time of Umar radiallahu anhu and Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu, things were so good. But in your time, there's all of this internal fighting and everyone's killing each other. So Ali radiallahu anhu said, the reason is because we were their advisors, you are our advisors. Like, it's you guys.
They had us and I have you.
Yeah.
That's how I feel a lot of the times.
That's great. I like it. That's a good maqala to have you know, at the front of our mind, that if you don't have something to give, if you don't have something, how are you going to offer it or give that thing to someone else?
You can't. You can't.
So we look at the hadith of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we find the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is telling the companions to focus on themselves. I feel like I read Surah Muzammil and I see Allah saying that to the Prophet. Ya
Subhanallah.
ayyuhal muzammil qum al-layla illa qalila.
Ajib.
That your effect during the day is dependent on the effort you put in during the night.
Subhanallah.
How much you're willing to sacrifice for Allah will be what determines how much you gain during the day.
Mm-hmm.
So when I think of Islam being compatible with individualism, I think what comes to my mind is that not only is Islam compatible, but Islam actually promotes individualism.
Mm.
However, with that said, where there is good of individualism, there's also the bad of it too.
Absolutely. I mean, what do they say, right? Like ifrat and tafrit, right? Any one kind of extreme or the other is problematic, right? The extremes are what are problematic. And one thing I always tell the students as well is one extreme breeds the other,
Mm-hmm.
right? So maybe what happened was when some communities and even, you know, may Allah forgive me, dare I say, even some family structures and extended family structures started becoming oppressive. Certain communities became oppressive, and actually took away the dignity and the autonomy of individuals. That extreme bred an opposite extreme of just like, you know, the heck with everyone, right? Forget about everyone and everything. I'm just looking out for number one, numero uno. I'm just looking
Mm-hmm.
out for myself. Absolutely.
Yeah, so people are, we have extremes, like you said. When it comes to hyper individualism, we have, unfortunately, a generation of people that are narcissists of themselves.
Allah.
They're posting eight pictures of themselves on their Instagram the same day. And one day there are 7 pictures of you going up. You know, there's so
I have so many uncle and dad like angst build up when you talk about this. I'm like, did you forget what you look like?
8 pictures a day, Sheikh.
Do you
Eight.
have it all stored there in your Instagram feed so you can go to your account and you can remember what you look like? I don't understand. If somebody's camera in their phone turns on and it's already in selfie mode, may Allah forgive me, may Allah forgive me, make dua for me that Allah forgives me and Allah makes me a good person. But I judge the person just a little bit. And I'm saying that's a bad thing. I'm saying that's a bad thing, guys. Listen, may Allah forgive me. But I don't know, man. It's interesting. Then you
Yeah,
have
so we
this
have.
like
I remember
kids.
the first time, Sheikh, I came.
This is
I
this
oh,
this is what kids do. The whole house is there. He comes and he takes a walk inside the room that I'm doing this.
because al-insanu harisun fima munia.
That's 100% true. Because I closed this door. Now he keeps coming in again and again.
But that proverb means that the human being is is compelled to do that which he's been told not to.
Exactly.
He said, "Don't do this." They have to do it. What was I saying? Yes. The first time I came across the definition of narcissism, Sheikh, I was blown away. I didn't know this word existed, by the way. I didn't know this was a word. I didn't know this was a actual, sort of classification of a type of human behavior.
Yeah,
Until
it's
I was,
frightening, isn't it?
I graduated. I came back to America. I was in a community, just in conversation with a psychologist, and I was describing the behavior of an individual I had interacted with, and I was saying that this is very obscure behavior. Like, this person is just full of themselves. And I was talking about this, and this psychologist turned to me and he said, there's a word for that. And I said, no. And he said, yeah. I said, what is it? He said, narcissism. And when I heard that, I was so blown away. I remember actually writing down what he said at that time because I was so shocked by how the bad of individualism, where you become egoistic, where you become narcissist, where you believe the world revolves around you, where you care nothing for anyone. If I'm going to be healthy by going outside and socializing, I couldn't care if someone else in the community died. Like, I really couldn't care. I'm here to party for spring break, and I'm going to party for spring break, and everyone else could die if they want to, but that doesn't impact me.
Ajib.
Right? And so that's the other side of individualism that we're seeing in our community, that people are so obsessed with themselves. They put themselves at the front of the line.
Mhm.
And now this impacts everything. This impacts the father-child relationship, because the father is giving priority to himself over his children. And I remember the hadith of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يحب لأخيه what is that? ما يحب لنفسه.
Mhm.
Right? And then that ayah, the ayah of the Quran, لن تنالوا البر حتى تنفقوا مما تحبون. So it's as if on the other side here, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is teaching us that where there is an importance on the individual, you can't get so carried away with yourself that it comes at the cost of other people being neglected, or possibly, may Allah protect, even being harmed at the same time. So there was a statement that I read during the study of the biography of Umar bin Khattab radiallahu an.
Mhm.
And someone asked Umar radiallahu an, how did you become such a great Khalifa?
Mhm.
How did you get so good at tadbir al-umur and managing people and managing nations? And in response to that, Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anh said, I learned to become a great Khalifa by managing camels.
Allahu Akbar.
And they asked him, what do you mean? And he said, well, earlier on in my life, when I was younger, I was a shepherd and I managed camels. And I was a herder. And as I was lead these camels to the pasture and bring them back in the evening, pasture meaning, just around the fields and feeding them and taking care of them and washing them. What I learned was that if I focused only on the group of camels, the community, there would be individual camels that had special needs that would be neglected.
Allahu Akbar.
And if I focused just on the individual camel, the herd or the group of them would be lost, and the collective need of my community would be ignored.
Ajib.
So there were times where I had to focus on the individual, and there were other times where I had to focus on the community. And then we see Umar radiallahu anh during his Khilafah, he was known for his night duty, right, Sheikh?
That's right. That's right. Where
And
he
so
would
many stories. So many stories.
He would patrol at night and check on people and see if there was somebody who was hungry, somebody that was in need, somebody who had some kind of a situation going on. And that's just astounding. It's remarkable when you really think about that. And that's pretty much what we've been talking about from the very beginning, is that, and again, we'll get more definitively to the discussion on community and, kind of the importance. We've been talking about the importance of the individual and their existence and their respect and their dignity, and their autonomy. And then we'll talk about the importance of community, and then we'll talk about kind of the extreme manifestations. But just hearing that right now, like kind of the direction that we're going in, and trying to establish like a sense of balance where you can actually have a lot of consideration for the individual and the needs and the wants and the inclinations and, the uniqueness of the individual, without completely having to sacrifice the collective and the community. And you can actually build something together without losing the uniqueness and the beauty of the individuals. And hearing that encapsulated in one example of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu is really remarkable. It's actually quite beautiful.
Yeah. I think of it this way, that there are times to focus on the individual, and being a community person at that time is fi ghayri mahallihi. Like that's not the right thing to be doing. And that's, I know this is a controversial issue, but it is what it is. This is one of the reasons why the Hanafis were not in favor or not supportive of nafil prayer in jama'ah.
Yeah.
Because they say that's an individual time. It's something that's done individually. And then there's something that's supposed to be.
And they were equally as rigid about the sanctity of the jama'ah.
Yes.
Where the fuqaha also stated, like, in the place where the jama'ah happens, like if you arrive at the masjid and you're not travelers, you're locals, like you and I walk into the Carrollton masjid, like 10 minutes after the Salatul Jama'ah happened, they advised against the two of us doing jama'ah. And a lot of people are like baffled by that notion. Oh, what about the reward of jama'ah? But they were equally as concerned about preserving the sanctity of the group effort, while at the same time not sacrificing the uniqueness of the individual experience.
Yeah. And it also took away, if you have multiple groups happening, then what happens to the main community? We're going to have breakout communities.
Yeah,
If people start praying a second, third jama'ah, what happens to the importance of the first jama'ah? It's very interesting that you cite that, because before we started our talk, our hangout, I was just doing some reading on the issue of this community and individualism. And as I was reading, I came across this very interesting statement that I wanted to share with you, Sheikh, if I may.
Yeah, the longer narration.
This is another one that it's actually exactly what you're saying. That Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala says, إذا كان للمسجد إمام راتب ففاتت رجلا أو رجال فيه الصلاة صلوا فرادى ولا يحب أن يصلوا فيه جماعة فإن فعلوا أجزأتهم الجماعة فيه وإنما كرهت ذلك لهم لأنه ليس مما فعل السلف قبلنا بل قد عابه بعضهم. So it's basically, for those of you who didn't catch it, I just said the statement of Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala in relation to what Sheikh Abdul Nasser just said, and it's word by word exactly that. Right?
Beautiful.
إنما كان لتفرق الكلمة. The statement continues on that the reason why he disliked for people to have multiple jama'ahs in a masjid was because it kind of took away from the, like, tafarruq al-kalima. Like, how would you translate that, Sheikh? Like,
it disunites the ummah.
Yeah, it breaks the ummah. People need to become more punctual. We should stop pampering bad punctuality, and we should encourage people to stick to one big community. So on the Ahnaf, on one side, they're saying that we don't like nafil prayer in jama'ah because we say that's the time for the individual worship. And on the other hand, there is a time for communal worship, which is for men in particular, the follow the jama'ah prayer. We really want people to come. So there is a time and place for each one. Now, we've talked so much about individualism. Let's focus a little bit on community, Sheikh.
Mm-hmm.
Why is community so important in Islam? Why is investing in a community? Why is developing a community? Why is it more important for me to focus on being involved in my masjid, in my local soup kitchen, in my local relief work, rather than me just tucking myself away in the gym for another 5 hours if I had 5 hours available to me? Why should I focus on being involved with an Islamic institution and support? So why shouldn't I just have my own institution? Why doesn't everyone in the world just open up their own institution instead of working together as a community on serving people? What's wrong with, why are we promoting this community, and what are the benefits of it?
So, one of the things is that obviously we look first and foremost at the Quran, right? So time and time again in the Quran, it emphasizes the importance and the significance of working together and what can be accomplished by people together. Inna hadhi ummatukum ummatan wahida wa ana rabbukum fa'budun, right? وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا. Hold firmly on to the rope of God together and do not become disunited and splintered and broken off into groups. So the Quran's got a lot of emphasis on it. The Prophet ﷺ constantly talked about كُونُوا عِبَادَ اللَّهِ إِخْوَانًا, right? Be the slaves of God together, united. And then, so that's obvious. So Allah said it, the Prophet ﷺ said it, that pretty much is enough and sufficient. But for the purposes of discussion here, to further kind of unpack some of the wisdom that might be embedded therein in this advice, one of the things that gets me thinking a lot is when it talks about yadullahi ala al-jama'ah, right? That the hand of God is over the group, the jama'ah, the unified group. And the fact that the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is with them. And there's so many different analogies that, and examples that have always been given, right? It talks about, like, if your fingers are like this, you can break each finger individually, turn it into a fist, and it will break your face, right? And so there's all these ideas. And, one of the things that I realize in my own kind of like life experience and work and whatnot was that what can be achieved collectively so far beyond surpasses what can ever be done individually.
Mm-hmm.
It blows it out the water. There is literally no comparison, right? Medina was we always give we always understand the blessedness and the just the blessing of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But Medina was a collective effort. Medina was a collective effort. And so the idea of community, it's sacred. God talked about it. The Prophet, peace be upon him, talked about it. But for anyone who's wanting to kind of more understand it and needs to be incentivized, that what can be done collectively so far surpasses and outweighs anything that could ever be done individually, that it's not even a comparison, it's not even a competition.
When we talk about people like Bill Gates or Zuckerberg or even Elon, these people might be the head of the institution or the organization they're run, but are they really, like, do they really just represent themselves, or do they represent a collective group of people?
Exactly.
Who are all together?
And I think even the fact that we highlight one person over everyone and everything else that's going on is just it's indicative of just the culture that we're in, the cultural moment that we're in. It's indicative of that it is, we've just either become accustomed to, or we are more interested in glorifying an individual rather than recognizing the power of collective effort.
Yeah, I also think of it this way, Sheikh, that if I didn't have a community to support me, my life would probably be very miserable.
Mm-hmm.
Because who would I share? Like, when I want to understand the importance of community, I think of people who don't have it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for example, go and talk to someone who is new to Islam and ask them what it feels like to be Muslim on the day of Eid, when the Muslim community may not offer you family and they may not offer you community. Being alone on that day, how does it make you feel?
Mm-hmm.
For a student of knowledge who is traveling from one state to another state, and they're at a university or a college, and you ask them, if you don't have anyone around you, if you don't have your MSA or someone that's with you to support you, and you go through a small challenge in life, how do you get through it? I read Surah Al-Asr and I find community there. I find individualism and I find community. That's your individual part. That mankind isn't lost except for those who believe and those who do good deeds. That's that. And then the second two things are about community. وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ, it's tafa'ul. وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ, which in that scale that Allah places this verb on, tawasaw, tafa'ul, Sheikh, is min janibain.
Right. Mutual participation.
Mutual participation. So if people weren't there to pick each other up when we suffered loss, or weren't there to congratulate each other when we had good, then we would be at loss. There was a famous scholar from India by the name of Sheikh al-Hind, Sheikh Maulana Mahmud, rahimahullah ta'ala, great scholar. We can have a session just on him and his accolades and his writings and his commentaries and how deep he was. So he was caught and imprisoned during the British colonial rule of India.
Yeah.
And finally, when he was released, he delivered a lecture. And by the way, Maulana Hussain Ahmad Madhi rahmatullahi alayhi, from your teachers, obviously, he was imprisoned as well, and he went in prison with his sheikh in Malta. And when they were released, Sheikh Mahmud rahimahullah ta'ala delivered a lecture. And in the lecture, he said that I remained in prison for a very long time, and he was beaten and he was tortured. He said, I thought about every day I thought about this, that why is it that the Muslim Ummah is struggling, and why are we taking a beating like we are? And he said, I came down to two simple conclusions. Number one, he said, I felt that what the realization I came to was the reason why we were where we were we are where we are as a community in terms of humiliation and being a mess and not taken seriously. Number one, because of our lack of connection to the Quran.
Yeah.
And number two, he said, we broke up as an ummah. Because this is exactly that time where the Muslims are more interested in their national identities.
Yeah.
The Libyan is more interested in saying that he's Libyan before he's Muslim. The Pakistani is more interested in saying that he's Pakistani before he says he's Muslim. the Saudi is important in saying that he's interested in saying that I'm a Saudi before he says that I'm a Muslim. And so this is a sad thing, Sheikh.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, even spiritually, right? Talking about فَإِنَّ الذِّئْبَ تَأْكُلْ الشَّاةَ الْقَاسِيَةَ,
Mm-hmm.
right? That talking about how a wolf preys on the lone sheep. So even shaitan's able to pick you off and able to prey on you spiritually when you separate yourself from a community, right? And I kind of deliberately didn't use the word isolate yourself because, and that's I mean, I guess it would, it makes sense to touch on this right now, that while we are right now kind of physically, quote unquote, isolating from one another and distancing from one another, but even just this conversation that's going on right now, this is a way to think together and to come together, to believe together, to remind one another, to enjoin good upon one another, to tawasaw bil haqqi wa tawasaw bis sabr, to remind each other to be good, to remind each other to be patient, right? That, subhanallah, God is great. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is very merciful that he's allowed us and facilitated for us to be able to still have a sense of community, even when we physically are having to be away from one another.
Sheikh, I feel like one of the reasons why people are reluctant to get involved in their communities. I know there are so many Muslims who live in, for example, a particular town, a particular city. There's a masjid there. They're really excited at being involved in the masjid, but there are some problems.
Yeah.
There are some issues. So one of the common issues they feel is that I want to be involved in the community, but the community that I'm a part of is super cliquish.
Yeah.
And I hear this more from sisters and guys, and I hear this from guys too, that they're so cliquish. All of the, so-and-so people, all of the Salafis are together, all the Deobandis are together, all the Sufis are together, or we have all the Indian Pakistanis together. Like there are different cliques that exist within the community. And there are people who don't identify with being Salafi, Deobandi, Sufi, this, that, and they don't, and yes, they are from a particular ethnicity, but they don't have, a very overwhelming loyalty to that ethnicity. And so in a time where they're trying to get into the masjid,
there's also the factor of, like, a lot of times it's even very cliquish based off of, like you said, about ethnicity, but sometimes even because of like profession, right? It is the doctor.
That's a
It's
whole
the
problem.
doctor crowd, and this is the IT crowd, and here's the cab driver crowd, and right. I mean, it manifests in so many different ways.
So, what is your advice to people who want to be involved in the community? They see the value of it, but then they see these hurdles. Another hurdle that I see people facing when it comes to being involved in the community is that they see a community, but they're not sure if that community is focused right. Like, what I mean by that is, let me see if I can rephrase that, where they're like, what? There is a community, but the community, I'm not sure if their priorities are straight. Do I unmosque and walk away from the masjid and start a parallel community? Or do I do sabr, be patient, spend some time with this community, try to figure it out, and then see where it goes from there, So without doubt, there is some sabr that needs to, I think it's known, and we should all understand that there is a serious amount of sabr that you need to have when you decide to get involved with the community. Working with the team is never easy. Working with a crowd is never easy. It's easier for me to sit in my office and call shots from here. But when I go to Qalam and I'm working with a staff of people, there are people who are going to have different opinions. And sometimes I may not agree with them, but hey, it's a team, So how would you coach people to get involved in with community work, and ideally, and particularly if the environment isn't ideal? And then secondly, what are some characteristics that you think every team player needs to have if they want to make their community meaningful?
So one of the things that I think about a lot is that when somebody starts working somewhere, and they're kind of, entry level, they're starting out, they're the newest member of the team, and they start working somewhere. And again, the same things are there, right? It feels kind of cliquish at first. Obviously, right? The 8 other people on the team at your job have been working together for 5 years and you showed up yesterday. I guess they could probably do a little bit more to deliberately try to make themselves uncomfortable, to try to include you and make you feel more welcome and included, but they're not doing that right now. And so it feels kind of cliquish, it feels kind of difficult. You're not used to the custom and the culture. You have some different ideas about maybe how things can be done versus how they're being done. Everybody's just, using email to communicate. And so it's like 800 emails every day. And you're like, you could just use Slack instead and it's better and whatever, right? There's all these things going on. It sounds very parallel to with that person that you described who's has qualms about the community. They feel like, well, I'm not being fully welcomed in. I don't like the way that they're operating. I think that's not the optimal way to operate, and so on and so forth. So they're having some of the same struggles, right? The person who's new at their job, they haven't really kind of figured out what they're good at and what they're not good at and how they can contribute and whatnot. Same thing in the person in the community kind of feels like, I don't know yet really exactly how I can contribute here, so on and so forth. Why do people stick it out at work and figure it out? And why don't they stick it out in the community and figure it out there? And the answer is very simple. That's my job, dude. I get paid to do that. And so I got to do it. I have no choice. But I want to call time out there and ask the person, wait a second. When you say it's your job, what makes it your job? What makes it your job is that your participation here, you come here, you participate here, you give something here, and you get something in return. That's what you call a job. That's a contract. And so because you understand what you're getting, you understand the value and the significance of what you're getting, because everybody knows the value of money. Everybody knows what $1 is worth. Then that makes it worth your while. That makes it worth sticking it out. That makes the juice worth the squeeze. But maybe in the community, we don't really know exactly what we're getting out of this. We haven't given that any thought. We haven't really understood how precious and valuable and necessary for my soul it is what I can get out of here. And that's why I don't care. And that's why we kind of have, and I'll talk about myself. That's why I might even have a bad attitude sometimes when even functioning in the community, like I'm doing everybody here a favor. I'm doing the whole world a favor. I'm doing the whole ummah a favor. When in reality, I don't understand that I'm bringing something very, very meager to the table, but I'm taking a whole lot back with me. Whether I realize that now or I realize that down the road, I just haven't really understood that yet. And so that's something that makes me kind of think about this, that it's probably because we haven't really given thought what I get out of this spiritually in this life, in the next life, right? And what is the value of what I'm getting out of this situation? And due to that, I think that ends up being the root of a lot of the issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think about this all the time. I think to myself that how many times in Islamic history, we've studied Islamic history, it's a very long history. Sheikh Amin always makes a distinction between Islamic history and Muslim history. So I think I'll just jump over Islamic history, referring to the time of the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba, and Muslim history is everything after that. We're just Muslims and their history, and there's a lot of good and there's a ton of bad too. So I think of Muslim history, and I think of all the times where things could have been so awesome if one person was just a little patient.
Yeah.
If one person chose to be a little patient, how the story could have been so different, and how so many lives could have potentially been saved, so much money could have been saved if one person could have been a little patient. But we only see this retrospectively. So when I'm living my life, I keep telling myself, Hussein, just be a little bit more patient with people, work towards community, focus on people, in addition to focusing on yourself, because it's possible my patience today might pay off so much more. If I could be patient with my spouse today, I don't know, but it might pay off for my kids. But if I stop being patient with my spouse, it might be my kids who pay. It might be myself. It might be her. I don't know. Like, I don't know the future. But what I do know is the history tells me that there were a lot of people who could have done a lot more with their life had they been patient at one particular moment of their life.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So
And
that leads that. Sorry. Go ahead, Sheikh.
I was just going to say that what that also makes me kind of think about and realize, and you know, somebody put a comment here as well, and kind of a question that, and I just wanted to draw that distinction that there are lines, there are red lines, what we call, right? So there are lines that, you know, should not be crossed. When things become unethical, when things become truly oppressive and unethical, fundamentally violate the very fundamental principles of Islam, then obviously that's a situation that you have to kind of take a step back from, right? You have to take a step back from that. Again, doesn't mean you'll totally abandon the whole situation forever and ever for all of eternity, but in the moment you do take a step back, right? If there's a fire, you step back, right? So
you're talking about in scenarios where you feel like community is getting toxic.
Right, it's getting toxic, or something in that particular, you know, structure or organization or institution or whatever it may be, something very, very fundamentally evil and unethical is occurring.
You know, I was thinking, sorry, Sheikh, and I don't want this to go too far because we are live and a lot of some conversation should be kept for offline.
Right.
But I was reading about the experience of a particular sister who, you know, long story, and I think we discussed this before too, and she found herself caught in a cult.
Allahu Akbar.
And she shares her experience of how it was very toxic. She was looking for community, she was looking for righteous community, and then she ended up in the wrong community, because what she found was that there weren't people who were objective. There weren't people who were thinking for themselves. There were not people who were critical. I think being critical of your community is what creates value in your community.
Of course.
But rather, there was a situation where the leader of the community was sexually abusing women. He would kiss the women, and then he would say to them that I am allowed to do this because this is the way the teacher mentor expresses his love for his students, and you should thank Allah that I am blessing you by doing this act to you. And so, you know, and then you look at this again and you think to yourself, she was looking for a community, but now guess what? She's caught in a cult. And the courage that it took her to get out, you know, like you were talking about stepping back. When I was reading, not just hers, but there are other stories, so many stories out there that you read like this. And I was thinking of the example of Salman al-Farsi radiallahu anhu. How he got caught in a few bad communities.
Yeah. I mean, the very first one he talks about, after he basically embraced the Christianity of that time and, you know, ran away from his village and arrived at a monastery to basically live there and worship there and study there and learn there and hopefully find a mentor, that the head priest that he ended up with was very, very corrupt. And he was basically what we would call today embezzling funds, right? He was basically stealing from the charity contributions of the community. And, you know, that's an amazing example where he recognized it was wrong. One of the versions of the story actually says he reported him. So he did something about it. He recognized it was wrong. He did something about it. But at the same time, he then inquired, who is someone that I can go and receive mentorship from, and I can study with and learn how to properly worship under? Like, still ask for a recommendation on being able to continue his path in religion and spirituality. Like, he did not lose his vision and his passion and his cause because a filthy individual came along. He discarded the filthy individual and kept on the path.
And that's beautiful, because Islam teaches us morality, and it gives us guidelines for what a good individual looks like and what a good community looks like.
Absolutely.
Anytime you find a community that's not willing to, and I think this is a massive red flag, because most communities have leaders, and anytime you have a leader in a community who demands, sort of like, absolute authority, in the sense where no one else can criticize, no one else can question, they're right, and that's it, that's final. My advice usually is just walk away.
Yeah.
No human being should be unchecked.
No.
It doesn't matter how long your beard is, or it doesn't matter how dark your niqab or hijab is,
Yeah.
Everyone should be open. I mean, Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam took shura from the companions, and Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu said that if I do good, then follow me, and if I don't do good, then correct me, but correct me with wisdom and softness. And Umar radiallahu anhu, when he became Khalifa, in his inaugural speech, he said, "Ibtalakumullahu bi wabtalani Allahu bikum."
Allahu Akbar.
That God tested you guys through me. So it's about to get real. But wabtalani Allahu bikum. Right? Where
That's
he's saying
amazing.
that God has also tested me through you guys. So we will work together, and we're going to make sense out of this. So anytime I see any model of spirituality, community, tazkiyah, where it all boils down to one individual again. And by the way, for those,
even Mufti Sahib, even organizations and institutions that are like this, like solar system, where everything's revolving around this one central figure. I mean, I'm sorry, I thought, the Prophet ﷺ was Khatamul Anbiya. Right, Khatimun Nabiyyin. I thought there's no more prophets coming. There ain't no one person that everything can revolve around afterwards. That's not how things work. I mean, that I find very little motivation and very little actual value. And may Allah forgive me again. I know that some of my language might be kind of strong. That's a combination of age and it getting late. But I don't know. I feel like I don't really have, I don't have any interest in those kinds of situations. Yeah.
I don't remember exactly when this happened. I literally just jumped online to see if I can find it, but I can't. You'll remember this. It was in Milwaukee that we sat together and we talked. It was like 8 years ago, 7 years ago, 8 years ago.
8 years ago, it was snowing outside.
I remember that.
I'm a Texas guy. Okay, so it was snowing outside, and we were sitting in your car late at night having a long conversation.
And in that conversation,
but you had the heater on. May Allah reward you.
Sheikh, I'm a Mayman, but I'm not that type of Mayman. I'm the type of Mayman that looks after other Maymans. Community. So I remember in that meeting, we were talking, and this was a time where I think right around then, either you had just launched the seminary or was about to be launched.
We were preparing for it.
Yeah. So the Qalam seminary was about to come into existence, and we were talking, and at that time, there was this discussion about moving to Dallas and teaching at the seminary. And I remember asking you something, and I don't know if you remember this, but I asked you something at that time. And at that time, it took me a lot of thought, and I really had to ask myself if this was a question that I wanted to ask, because it was very possible that by asking this question, this relationship could have ended.
Mm-hmm.
And this question was so delicate that I remember telling myself that if I ask this question, and if he doesn't, if I don't know how he's going to receive the question, I don't know what he's going to say, but this could end very bad. Should I ask it or not? I remember thinking this in my mind, and I was like, you know what? This Sheikh Abdul Nasser, guy's a chill guy. Let me ask. And I don't know if I would ask this question to too many people. And maybe if I ever did join an institution again, if that ever did happen, I would definitely ask this question. And the question I asked you that time was, because you were talking about Qalam and saying, hey, why don't you think of joining Qalam? And I was like, yeah. And we were talking about it, and you were presenting the vision at the time. I was still new to Qalam. I knew you very well. I knew Abdullah very well. Abdullah,
Yeah.
your brother.
Yeah.
Ustad Murphy, Chicago relationships, knew him as well. And then I asked you, is Qalam about Sheikh Abdul Nasir?
Yeah.
Or is Qalam about something bigger than him?
Mm-hmm.
And that question could have gone so bad.
Yeah.
If I was talking to a guy who, who was about his ego, that could have gone really bad.
Yeah.
Good, defensive, angry, frustrated. Who do you think you are?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I remember at that time, your answer was so beautiful. And I remember Sheikh saying to me at that time that, I'm a khadim of Qalam. Qalam is about something much bigger than me.
Yeah.
And that really hit a note with me. And that reminded me of, something that reminded me of what I had read about in the past. And, anyway, I don't want to go further on that issue. To close off our discussion, Sheikh, there's one last discussion point that I really wanted to bring up. And then if we have some questions here, if we want to touch on some of them briefly as we close up the session for tonight. The last thing that I wanted to bring up is, since we're talking about community, building community, obviously as Muslims living in the West, and particularly in America, there's so much more that can be done to build community. There are some things that we have done, and there are so many other things we haven't done. Do you have any cool ideas in mind? If you had a never-ending resource of people, of talent, of money, and you could choose some projects that you wanted to bring to the community to enhance community, make it more inclusive, or maybe even just improve the quality of people involved in our community, what would it be, Sheikh?
I think that the most powerful kind of experience of community and how people really feel a sense of belonging is by connecting with other people. And I think that the person who serves any given community makes a huge difference and a huge impact in whatever community they're in. So many different places, and we talk about it all the time. You go to a particular community, right? And you're like, wow, there's such a nice vibe here. And it's never a coincidence that there is somebody there serving the people in the community, being that central force who is trying to bring people together, who is always trying to facilitate things for people, like true khadim of his people, right? Spiritually serving his people. That's never a coincidence. It's like a lazim malzoom, what they call, right? It's like a necessity. Wherever you go and you see a really great positive vibe in the community, there's always somebody there who has dedicated themselves to the building of that particular community, right? And that's something we see time and time again. We see it everywhere we go. And so for me, and that kind of comes back around to what we were just talking about, that's one of the big ambitions and the end goals and visions that we hope to achieve through Qalam, and specifically the seminary. And so, like you said, if there was an endless resource of talented people ready to go, ready to give us their time, and there were financial resources to facilitate the teaching and the learning and the proper training and mentoring of all these people. Because, for instance, if it's just you and I, then, we can handle 20 students, 40 students, 50, 60, and now we're like, now we can't really give anybody any quality. So it requires scaling of that effort. If we could do that, right now we have 100 plus students in the seminary. I mean, having 1,000 plus students in the seminary, where instead of graduating 10 to 15 people every year, we'd be graduating 100 people every year. I mean, hands down, blindfolded, no questions asked. That's what I think would make a humongous difference. The way I kind of explain it is like, we know the hadith, right? And may Allah make us worthy of it one day. May Allah make me worthy of it one day. Ya mashallah are remarkable. But, in the ulama warathat al-anbiya, scholars being the inheritors of the Prophet, meaning the true scholars, good scholars, trained and qualified and mentored and righteous, like all are like a little kind of seed. They're a little kind of grain. They're a small grain, chota dana. They're like a grain from this never ending garden of prophethood and nubuwah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So each one of them carries a little bit of khair and barakah. The Prophet ﷺ had such impact that he caused ripple effects throughout the whole world, and he changed the whole world. Mm-hmm. The each and every single person who follows in those footsteps of prophethood, and you see, this is what I was talking about, wherever they're at, they cause an impact and they cause some ripples around them. And I always explain it this way. So it's like, Ustad Abdurrahman Murphy causing these ripples in the Irving, area, and Mufti Kamani causing ripples over here, and Sheikh Mubin in Frisco, and, and then someone in Houston, and someone in Austin, and someone in Tulsa, and someone in Atlanta. And then one day, when we can spread so many of these people out there who have an impact and cause those ripples, where those ripples start to meet each other and start to merge together, then like some serious change is coming. Something really beautiful is happening. So anyways, that's kind of what the inside of my head looks like.
I think so. The perspective you're looking at it is that we need more people out there who care about community building, who have the individual talent and the training to do community building, who can be involved with, because mega communities are barely communities.
And to loop back to what you said earlier, because you made such a beneficial point earlier, where you talked about the individual's got to be grounded, got to be sound. So they care about the community, they want to build community, but they themselves, their soul has been nourished. Their job's not done. No human being's job's done until we leave this dunya, right? Khatima bil iman. We all want to leave with faith. But at the same time, though, their soul has been nourished. They got gas in their tank. And then they can drive the car forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the thing. We want people out there who can build community, develop community, push it forward. And I think that's, I was also thinking that when you don't have enough people, you end up getting these massive mega communities where there's like 10,000 people to a masjid. That's not a thing, but you know what I mean, right?
Yeah.
And when you have big communities like that, it's very unlikely that you're going to be able to maintain a real relationship. I think the best communities I've seen in America are communities that cater to like 100, 200 people.
Yeah.
Like those are the most effective one. That's where they have potlucks and everyone knows each other and everyone's involved in everyone's parties. 300 people, they'll still pull it off. But when you're reaching like 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 people, at that point, it's just check in, pray, check out, gone. Nobody knows each other anymore.
Yeah,
nobody knows the guys next to them anymore. I
understand like visually, like the optics of it, right? It's a very powerful vision. But see, that's the thing, our tradition has that idea built into it. Like you said, if there were these 10, 15, kind of smaller communities with like 70 families each, 50 families each, right? And they're kind of spread out. There's that idea of there being like a Jami' masjid where everyone or a lot of those people can go pray Jum'ah together. So you still get the optics of that, like, it's very empowering, right? To see like 3, 4, 5,000 people praying together. It really kind of like excites you, right? So you can basically have it both ways. There is a way to have it both ways. We just have to be a little bit more thoughtful and creative in that sense.
Absolutely. Sorry, Sheikh. Okay. Yeah. So I had a thought on this too, if I may, on community development. So again, Sheikh's perspective was how to build community from like top down, right? how to
Yeah.
build community leaders. I think there is something that we can all do as well, every one of us, every member of our community. And that is that we should think of, I would like for everyone in our community to think of challenges they face as individuals,
Hmm.
because everyone comes from a different aspect, everyone comes from a different angle.
Yeah.
So someone's going to college. What are the challenges you face as someone that went to college? Someone's working the cab. Okay, what's the challenge you face there? Someone started up a small business. Okay, what's your challenge as a startup person? Someone who's married versus single. Like, there are so many challenges that people face. What would be really nice is if people who are a part of our community and are facing struggles, they champion those challenges and create communities around those challenges. Like, I know
Yeah.
so many people in the community who are married and they don't have children.
Yeah.
And this is something close to me, not necessarily because anyone in my family has been tested by Allah in this way, but many people in my community have been, and many people that I know have been. And seeing them struggle, I mean, it's so much pain.
I
People
agree.
continue to ask them, oh, when are you guys going to bring a baby in the family? And they're like, gosh, we've been trying really hard. And,
Right.
the wife's crying, the husband's crying, and they're struggling so much. There's no one to support them. Family tells them it's jinn baba, there's some jinn, some sihr involved. And then some of them are interested in adopting. They don't know where to go. They don't know who to ask. What's the right way? Are there any fiqh guidelines to this? I think a whole community can be developed around this issue. It doesn't have to be a unique community of its own, but like a sub community of a greater community, an online
Right.
sort of existence.
And
And
this goes back to that point that we were talking about earlier, right? Where it doesn't necessarily have to be one extreme or the other. It doesn't have to be only one way or the other. Where, as we were talking about, how you were mentioning, we also don't want this idea and this notion of people just splintering off and not sticking together with a community. But that at the same time doesn't mean that we cannot have, and we talked about, we definitely don't want cliques and things like that in the community, but that doesn't mean that we can't create separate kind of like areas of focus within the community. That's totally doable. It's again, it's just like how any organization runs, right? That there are some people who are working in marketing, and there are some people working in project management. There are some people who are working as faculty and academics, but they have their different areas of focus. But you got to make sure that everyone at the same time feels a sense of team and family and togetherness with one another, and it's possible to achieve the two.
I think that's a great conversation we had today, Sheikh, and we've covered so
Absolutely.
much.
One of the things that, inshallah, I know that we didn't talk about some of the hyper individualism and things like that. That's actually a really, really good topic, and that's something that we definitely are going to try to have a follow-up conversation to this on, especially involving Ustad Abdurrahman Murphy, because I've always appreciated his thoughts in that domain. In that regard, he talks a lot about spirituality and tazkiyah and the refining of the individual. And so this hyper kind of individualism, I really always appreciate a lot of his thoughts on that. The last thing that I wanted to kind of mention, and we want to actually have a whole hangout dedicated to this topic, but at Mufti Kamani's very, very insightful suggestion, we kind of put some thoughts together. I also spoke to some of the other folks at Qalam as well, and we put out a little message, specifically giving some much needed advice, nasiha, encouragement, himma, motivation to a lot of the healthcare workers.
mm,
They be folks working in the hospital, just the hospital workers, the nurses, the PAs, the physicians themselves, right? People in the ICU, people in the emergency room. It's a really, really tragic situation. It's a really, really scary situation. Um, and there's a lot of people, a lot of our own community people. I've literally been calling them every single day, calling few of them every single day and checking on them and talking to them. Some of them are even our own students. We have students at the seminary. And so we definitely want to make sure they're okay. Their families are also under a lot of duress and stress. And so inshallah, we'll have a whole dedicated conversation kind of talking about this whole, kind of just understanding, what they're doing and their sense of, commitment and whatnot. But at least for the time being, to give them a little word of, nasiha and advice and encouragement and motivation, we put out a little message. So inshallah, that'll be going out tomorrow. But I just wanted to bring it up. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enter into Jannatul Firdaus and count amongst the shuhada all the Muslim brothers and sisters who had died from this illness. Anyone who is
3 doctors passed away in the UK, 3 Muslim doctors, first Muslims to pass away, first Muslim physicians to pass away, first physicians to pass away in the United Kingdom for treating COVID-19 were 3 Muslim doctors.
Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. May Allah accept them into His mercy. And and anyone who is sick, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant them shifa. The families, may Allah grant them peace and comfort and protection and safety. May Allah, those who are not sick, may Allah keep them healthy and keep them safe and sound. Those who are serving those who are sick, may Allah reward them, may Allah bless them, may Allah protect them. And we pray anything is possible for Allah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala miraculously resolves this whole situation. And inshallah, everybody who's out there, hang in there, inshallah, stay strong, and stay, inshallah, connected to one another, stay connected with us. That's what we're here for. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for everyone. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.